Hi, welcome to Bunny Hugs and Mental Health here on YouTube. I'm your host, Todd Rennebaum. I've got a good episode for you here. My guest is Mandyy Thomas, and she's a financial coach, I think is what her title is. Anyway, we discuss belief systems and trauma and that kind of stuff around finances, what you can do about it, what can maybe cause belief systems and mental blocks and emotional blocks when it comes to money and savings. I know it's not a real sexy kind of episode, but I'm telling you, it's a good one. It's tax season. If you haven't done your taxes yet by the end of April, Anyway, and if you want to avoid this episode, all the more reason why you should probably listen to it. So there's that. I also want to quickly say hello and thank you to everybody at Co-op. It's amazing, your sponsorship and your support. It means the world to me, as well as the Canadian Centre for Addictions. I would love it if you or a loved one are struggling. Please check out the link that is in the show notes for them, or call the number that will be on the screen during the episode. Thank you to them. And yeah, so anyway, without further ado, I give you Mandyy. I've been struggling a little bit with finances, and I have issues with anxiety and depression and even ADHD. And I was looking the other day and I saw that ADHD people, it's not uncommon to have financial issues. But sometimes it really does affect my mental health. And also it's tax season coming up. That's not, when you join a mental health podcast and you think you're going to talk about mental health, I'm sure the thought of talking about finances isn't fun, but I think it's a pretty relevant discussion. So first, you were a financial kind of advisor person, but just recently you were taking another course to kind of expand on that. Do you mind talking about that a bit?
Yeah, so I've been a financial coach since 2017. So I work with clients who are employed by someone else, as well as a lot of entrepreneurs. And then I just seen a need for better bookkeeping. And so that was something that I decided, you know what, I would really like to be able to offer that as well. So that is kind of this past year, a newer service that I dove into to offer my clients to really go along with their financial coaching as well, because everyone needs their bookkeeping done for tax season. And I just see that there's such a difference between if someone has a brick and mortar business, for example, or if someone has maybe a virtual business, such as myself, that the bookkeeping is definitely different. And a lot of people don't know necessarily how to take that into account. So that's where I decided to offer this. And then for my own really unique way of doing things is the reason that I even got involved as a financial coach is because I had so much money anxiety growing up. I came from a low income household and didn't know what anxiety was, but looking back, realizing I had anxiety from a really young age when it came to money. And then I thought that what would solve everything was if I made more money. So that's what I did. I went into a high income earning career. I was a power engineer, which I absolutely loved. And then in my mid 20s, I was doing really well. I had saved $250,000 saved and invested by the time I was 26. And then I got really sick in my mid 20s. And I realized the reason that I got so sick was because I was just living in constant fear of losing that money, because I came out into the workforce into a recession. And then the industry I was in also in 2015 was going through their own recession as well. And so there was just this constant fear of not having enough money. And I got very sick from it. But because I was doing well and I was managing it well, I felt like I shouldn't have any anxiety because I was living in definitely a better situation than when I grew up. So I felt a lot of shame around that. And I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone, that I couldn't open up, because I felt like how it would be perceived as, we wish we had your problems. So I just didn't tell anyone. And I ended up getting very sick. And it was me working with someone on my health and going down the rabbit hole to understand what was really causing me the biggest stress, what was going through my head before I had a panic attack. And that was the biggest thing that I realized was it was all about money. It was all about a lot of that unprocessed scarcity that I grew up in. And then all of those situations growing up that always affected the feeling of income coming in, that just rattled your sense of safety and security. And so that's where I really come across a lot differently when I'm working with clients and in my content, because I've been there through that emotional side, understanding not only how much that affects your mental and emotional health on a daily basis, but how much that directly impacts your physical health as well. So that's where I take a different approach of also just a little bit more holistic and talking about processing how you're feeling about it. It's not just the tangibles. There's so many things that make it really difficult for people to manage their money well, and there's a lot of shame. So that's where I really like having these types of conversations, so people feel less alone in those struggles, because it doesn't really matter how much someone's making or what they have in the bank. They can still be feeling a massive amount of anxiety, unable to sleep. I was on sleeping pills when I was 26 years old, and they made me feel absolutely terrible, but I could not sleep at all because it just got the anxiety was so bad at that time in my life. I needed something to try and help me through that.
Interesting. So, uh, you made as much money as you possibly could to like squash any anxiety about money, but that wasn't really what it was. It was actually an emotional tie and a physiological tie, maybe traumatic energy from something for whatever childhood stuff there was that actually created the anxiety. Um, so it's quite possible you could, if you treated that first, you would have been happy with $2,000 in the bank savings instead of $250,000 in your bank account.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I do want to say is you do need to have a certain level of money to feel any sense of financial security. So I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
disregard that, because there's a
Mm-hmm.
big thing that I hear people say, like, money doesn't buy happiness. No, it does not, but it definitely can make sure that your bills are paid and you don't have that anxiety about overdrafting your checking account. So I do want to make sure that I'm also prefacing that too, of that is a really big thing that I find right now in the times that we're living in, with how much inflation has increased. It
Mm-hmm.
is massively affecting how people are feeling in their mental health, because if you feel like you can't even afford to maybe fill your vehicle or actually get groceries, those are not wants. Those are things that we need to get through our lives. And if you feel at all like you don't have enough money to just take care of your actual need, your wants, sorry, your needs, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that just it's taking a very massive toll on people right now, because yes, everyone's kind of talking about it, but they're not really diving into and having a safe space to really open up about what they're going through. So I will say definitely income massively does affect this, but I didn't, Instagram wasn't a huge thing back then, and there wasn't the resources that there are now. So you really do need to see the two. There are two sides to the coin. One is physically making enough money to make sure your bills are even paid to begin with. And I don't just mean just your bills. I also mean those other things that come up, like being able to travel and put your kids in sports and all of those types of things. So not just your fixed expenses, but your one-off and your whammy expenses. You also need to have enough money to cover those as well. So there's that tangible side. And then there's the emotional side of, I don't know anyone who doesn't have some sort of money trauma that also needs to be dove into and processed, because they'll both affect each other, both sides of the coin.
Right. So it's a balance of the two. Nice. Yeah, and it's like, so you brought up inflation and stuff, and I know right now it's like it's kind of scary. It's like if something major breaks down in the house, that could just be, the rug could be pulled out from under us. It's mostly my fault because my wife has a good job and stuff, but yeah, I've with my ADHD, I've quit every job I've had for, I last about 2 years, and now I'm trying to make a hobby into a full time thing. And I'm seeing progress, but it's slow. So that's all fine and good. We knew it's going to be tough for a bit, but for me, it's the emotional stuff that is driving me crazy. I mean, yes, that peace of mind of having finances is very important to me, but I also know, like, it, this is temporary until things start to come around. But it's the shame, it's the guilt, it's all those stuff, that internal dialogue that I have, that I've always kind of been struggling with, that really makes it hard, because then it almost it's then, yeah, it's hard to make money then when you're kind of always feels like there's a gun to your head and it's you putting that gun to your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 Huh.
When there's that pressure, it is hard when you feel like, holy cow, constantly that you're just at that edge. Pressure doesn't make things better for sure, because that just, it feels like it's do or die. And then your nervous system in that case is you're either running on adrenaline, which was what was happening for me. So I hit major burnout because I was constantly super stressed, that my adrenaline was just continually pumping, and that's what was running the show until I really, really crashed. And absolutely what you're saying, it makes complete sense. We need that adrenaline to be able to go through certain times of stress. But if that stress turns into chronic stress, it takes such a massive toll on both the mental and the physical health of our bodies.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it's like I'm so scared of getting depressed because of this internal dialogue that I'm not doing anything. So it's like, okay, this is like doubly not helpful. It's like, so what kind of strategies do you, well, I guess, how do you do the emotional part with clients? Like, is it kind of like talk therapy, or is it, you
Yeah.
said it's holistic. So,
Yeah.
um,
So what
yeah,
I like to do first is I like to listen. Like, I like to let clients talk. And one of the modality that I've found as one of the most helpful ones for myself and for clients is something called tapping. Have you heard of tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique?
I have, my wife is big into body talk and stuff.
Yep,
So yeah, there's a lot of
absolutely.
tapping in that. Yeah.
Okay. So how I talk to clients about it is, let's say, for example, we hop on a coaching session and they're just giving me an update of how things have been going. And let's say that they're telling me a story and it's like, it's pretty negative, like what they've been feeling, what they've been experiencing. I will still just sit there and listen. But what I will do is I will just take my fingertips and I will just start tapping on my collarbone point. And they're going to keep talking. And what I just want them to do is I just want them to keep telling me what they're telling me. And I just want them to start to mirror me to get that added benefit of them just going through and brain dumping all of their feelings and their fears and their worries, but get that added benefit of, let's start calming down that nervous system. Let's start bringing that down. I'm not going to go through the full tapping sequence of all the points. I'm just going to just make things simple, and I'm just going to tap on my collarbone. And so that's something that I want them to do as often as it comes up in their daily life. Is, let's say that they're stressing about something financially, I want them to put a voice to it, because this is what I have found has been really helpful. Is, even though everyone is feeling the effects of inflation and everyone knows it's difficult, people still feel extremely alone in their struggles, because most people don't really have a fully safe space to open up to be extremely honest. People might say, like, money's tight, we can't afford this right now, but they won't say exactly the words that are running through their head, which is the really important part, is to have that space. So I will have clients just be as honest as possible with me, and we will just get all of it out, all of those fears, all of the worries, no matter how maybe valid something seems, or if it is way down the rabbit hole. Like, for example, for me, when I was going through that time of that really bad anxiety, it was typically in the afternoon or the evening, and I would just think one thought about money, and then I would spiral. And it always just ended up leading to, we're going to lose our house and we're not going to have any food, and I'm going to have to go to the food bank. And even though that was quite irrational, that a lot of things would have to happen before then, there's actually comfort in being really honest in how you're feeling and being able to say that out loud. So I'll have clients in the first part of their tapping and you don't need to think about any structure. It's just, what is going through your head? What are the fears? What are the worries? What are the anxieties? And just saying them, putting a voice to them. And then after that, then saying the positives of how do they want to feel. Like, it might start off, some of the statements might be more neutral, and then getting positive of, how do you want to feel? What do you want to happen? What would you like your circumstances to be? And the reason that I find this so effective is because there's a lot of stuff in the online space that can seem like it's very helpful, people talking about manifesting and just changing and that sort of thing. But I find that there can also be a lot of toxic positivity, because it's completely disregarding someone's financial trauma of the past or what they're currently going through. And that it just is like, oh, just smile and just think positive and everything will improve. And what I find is that when people get a chance to be actually honest about how they're feeling, then it is easier for them to take some sort of action, even if it's really small, they can start to take those actions because they feel validated that stuff has been really hard, that it feels like it's been a struggle. And that was for me as well in my journey, was someone validating that even though I'd saved up and invested this much money, and that it was still valid that I was struggling because I had anxiety and I was binge eating. So I just felt so much shame for the way that I was numbing because I did not know how to process my emotions. And the vast majority of adults don't, because our parents didn't know how. They also, I'm not blaming them, they had way less resources than what we have access to now. But that's something is, we'll talk a lot about, financial knowledge and financial literacy, but not talking about the emotional side, because you can have all the financial knowledge and know what to do and be struggling to take action. So that's just a really important thing, is to figure out what can work for you when it comes to different emotions. I'll also say it can take some time to really understand what are you actually feeling. So I'll tell clients to just tap and just say what's ever coming up. And the more that you do this, the more that you'll be able to understand what are you actually feeling. I find tapping works really good for frustration, for sadness, fears, and worries, for that type of scale. I find for things like anger and resentment, like let's say you had a financial trauma that was from a relationship and you're carrying a lot of debt because of having to get out of that situation, there can be a lot of bitterness, resentment that's just sitting there that no one knows how to process. And that's something where I'll tell clients, like, figure out what is a safe way to work through that. So an example that I really love personally when it comes to more of the frustration, bitterness, resentment scale, tapping to me doesn't work as much because then I get really fired up. But I love tapping for the other sides, the fears and the worries and the anxieties. For me, when I'm feeling more of those heavier emotions that really do stem from anger, even if you don't feel angry, that's where they're coming from, is I take a ball and I will go downstairs. It's a dog ball that I got at Dollarama, and it bounces, and I will throw it up against the wall and I will say all of those things, so similar to tapping, and I will physically move them through my body by throwing that ball. And I'll play music that is a different type of music than what I would normally listen to. Like, it helps me to just move through those feelings. And that's been really effective, as well as using a punching bag. For example, we've put one up that's been for those types of emotions. So allowing yourself to explore, but having something that you can physically use to move through them can be really helpful. But I think it's helpful for actually saying the things out loud, because a lot of times they're just going through our head, and it can help us to process them and deal with them if we do say them out loud.
Mm-hmm. A bit like, well, some people do journaling for different reasons, and you just got to get it out of you.
Yep.
Yeah. So have you been able to, like, almost pinpoint some people's, like, emotional traumas around money? It's like, through these things, it's like, oh, it's because my grandma burnt a nickel once or something. I don't know what I'm trying to talk about, but like, people had no idea why they were having these emotional issues.
I do find a lot of times it is really hard for people to really have the awareness around where that stems from. So that's where sometimes I'll start asking questions, like, a lot of times, like, let's talk about your mom and your dad separately, and how would you describe their relationship with money, what they would say about money. And that can start to, all of a sudden, a lot of stuff will just start coming out. But I do find that having someone to kind of guide it and ask questions can be really helpful. So that's where a lot of times, like, any money scarcity growing up causes a lot of money trauma. So for me, my money trauma went the opposite way, where I became, like, very hyper focused on it and extremely aware and very in control. But I see a lot of times scarcity will cause people to really avoid things a lot. Like, that is the most common money behavior, is avoidance. Another thing is, if people go to school and let's say that they are highly skilled and educated, and they're making a lot of money, I will see a lot of times they're struggling because they're always coming from those worthiness issues of growing up. They heard no a lot, and they've told themselves, like, I make good money and I am going to buy myself what I want. But then it's a sabotaging, because it's coming from more of a rebellion energy of, like, I never got this growing up, so I'm going to get it for myself, whatever I want, because I work really hard, and I'm going to get my kids whatever I want because I didn't have that growing up. I want them to have that. And to some extent, like, that's definitely a balance there of being able to afford something versus buying something, and then all of a sudden your lifestyle has gotten to the point where that lifestyle creep is so much that you're making a lot of money, but you have no breathing room and it's really hard to get ahead. So that's another thing too, is seeing like, tell me how it felt growing up with money. Was like, for example, if money was something that was never talked about, it is so common that in their relationship, there might be partners that don't even know how much each other makes. They might not know what each other's expenses are. They might not know what each other's debt is, or if another one has debt. So that's something where if you've seen it, or if you've seen money fights growing up, it can be really hard to communicate about money now, because all you associate money with is fighting. Like, I seen a ton of fighting when it came to money growing up, and I can tell you that that definitely affected how I was able to communicate about money. It was a lot more work for me than maybe someone who there was healthier conversations about money, and their parents, there was a lot more neutral emotions in their house growing up. So definitely there are a lot of things like that. Or if income was affected, if someone lost a job growing up, or if you had a single mother or a single parent, all of those things will really like affect how we feel about money. Our money, really how we feel about it, really is solidified by the time that we are 7 years old. Already by that point, the experiences that we have had, those are really ingrained in our brain. And that's most of the time what is running the show going forward. As much as people would like to think it's their adult self and it's logical, really it isn't. It's usually emotional, coming from what we did experience growing up. And so for me, that was the other thing where it was really hard for me to spend on myself, because when I was like 11, 12 years old, I grew up on a farm. We went through BSE, so we couldn't sell any of our animals for how many years. And I remember just going to my parents to get new winter boots because my feet had grown. And I remember, rehearsing for 4 hours in my bedroom. How was I going to tell my parents I needed new boots? Because I felt like it was just going to ruin how the household felt for the next week, because this was an expense that they were going to have to pay for. And so really thinking back to how did money feel growing up? I've even had sometimes clients where money was actually really good, but nobody taught them anything about it. So then their spending, they just felt like they didn't need to look at anything. And then that led them to a ton of debt in their 20s. So now they're resentful at their parents for not teaching them about money or budgeting. So really it is looking back at those early experiences with money. Of course, as an adult, what you've experienced matters too, but there is so much that tells a story from when you were younger. What did you experience? How did you feel? How did the household feel?
Can you fix me? Can you make me wealthy? I don't want to be wealthy. I just don't want to worry anymore. God damn it. But anyway, I know. I'll just be positive. Man, this is good stuff. Yeah, there's a lot to know. And you must get a wide range of reasons why people have emotional trauma around money.
Yeah,
Like,
there's so many different things that can affect it. And what I also find too is people will think about, once they start to understand about the financial trauma, which does not necessarily need to be a financial event. It can just be something that affected money, for example. So it doesn't need to be like it's indirect to money. Something happened to someone, there was an accident, and then that, led to a financial trauma from there. But what a lot of times happens because of financial traumas, depending on how they were handled, that a lot of times then you don't trust yourself with money, or you feel less confident making financial or life decisions, and it lingers over your head like a dark cloud. So that's where I like to also tell people about needing to build back up the trust in yourself and allowing yourself. So that would be, for example, tapping on the mistakes from the past, to let them go. And I don't just mean tapping on this once. You're not just going to do this once and then boom, you don't have any feelings of shame and guilt. And this is continually doing this. And it's something that it definitely takes time. It's kind of like, we need to shower, on a regular basis because we get dirty often. It's the same thing with our thoughts and how we are thinking. So that's another thing too, is just understanding that we also need to build up that self-trust again. That's a really common thing that we need to do, because if someone starts to learn about something that's a good thing that they could do financially, they might not be doing it because they made a mistake in the past and they're so afraid of making a mistake that they would rather not do anything than potentially take an action that could change things positively.
The Canadian Centre for Addictions believes in being the home away from home you need to begin healing. From private rooms, residential treatments, and caring support, their luxury rehab centers offer the best inpatient care. Here, you decide how much you would like to finance, whether it's the entire amount for treatment or just a portion, and what repayment terms fit your needs, from 6 months to 6 years. 5-Star Care helps our residents learn how to lead 5-star quality lives. To learn more, please call today. I think I'm all those things. Like there's been a time where I didn't worry about money because I was making pretty good money. I don't think I overspent. Like, we had a fairly good budget. I was like anyone else. I had a mortgage and whatever. Um, but but even then I was like almost overprotective of the money I did have. So I was like, "Why are you buying that for?" From my wife, and it's like, "Oh, the kids need new pants." Like, "Oh, we'll go to Sears Bargain Center." And it looks like I'm a tightwad or cheap or whatever. So then those labels get thrown around in my brain too. But I know it is some kind of emotional thing. I'm not sure where it stems from or what. Um, and then I see my brother, who's a business person, and he'll take risks with his money because he's confident. So he's like, I'm investing in stuff. I'm gonna buy a building. I'm gonna do this stuff, and it always pays off. I'm so scared of doing that I just for even the podcast and stuff. It's like I'm so scared of investing money in something I'm doing. It just terrifies me. But I'll quit a job at a drop of a hat, which is also financially, you know, um, risky. But because there's nothing up front, I'm not going in debt instantly because I'm going to the bank and getting a loan or something. Does any of this make sense? Or
Yeah, because
okay,
basically the reason, so you said like you're more risky on this end, but not risky on this end. And there's ways that, depending on our patterning, what we experienced, that we will justify why we were able to quit our job when, things weren't quite financially stable on the business side yet, or why we're like, ooh, it feels too risky to invest in this. So, for example, I also think there's a difference if you probably would, if this would have been a conversation in 2019 versus now. After 2020, I really feel like, so I've been coaching since 2017, and I feel like I've really changed how I speak about money since then, not just from experience, but because the world is a vastly different place than before. So in
mm-hmm.
2019, there would have been a lot more certainty of this is the way that kind of the world works, and this is the way that it's gone for the last how many years, versus then 2020 hit, and literally things that people couldn't have even had anxiety around, all of a sudden that was our reality. So that's where certain things you can justify, and certain things that you can't. So that's where um, right now, especially like with interest rates being so high, there's a lot more people that are just thinking through their decisions a lot more when it comes to any money going out the door. So when you're talking about growing the podcast, to me that makes sense that it's a common fear right now, because it is money going out the door in a extremely tight period of time, versus when was it that you had quit your job? When was that timeline?
Just September, just a
Oh,
few months
okay.
ago.
Okay. So that's something too where there's more motivation on the passion side for you, for example, to get things going. So that could have been something where you're really seeing the positives of entrepreneurship and what you want to do in the world. So it can be easier to then make that decision to do that. But yet the other one
Mm-hmm.
on the other end of the scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's funny because also, like, I'm at the age where my parents, when they had a mortgage, interest rates were like 20% or something, like 18%, like, was insanity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and same thing, but I didn't grow up in much money, and it was, um, at the same time, well, I guess mom had part-time jobs here and there. But my dad was basically the one that was working, and yeah, there was a lot of arguments about money when I was a kid. So yeah, I don't know what it is. If it's, I mean, it's so complex, right? Our emotions and our brains and stuff. Like, there's probably not one thing, because when I look at my brother, who grew up in the same house with the same parents and, very similar traumas, but yet he doesn't have, the those the same fears I do about debt or, risk.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So
And the ADHD aspect also affects that too. I'm not sure if your brother
right.
is ADHD as well. Like I'm ADHD. And so there's certain things that, and the vast majority of my clients are as well. So there's definitely things there when it
Really?
comes to, yes. Yeah. That was something that I didn't announce until I think it was, I'm going to say maybe 2023 or if it was 2022. I can't remember now when it was I had announced that. And I had a lot of clients that already came to me that either they said that up front. It was typically people would tell me up front. And then all of a sudden I went, wow, I haven't talked about this at all. And this is the clients that I have just, pulled into me that I think I've also had a client that when I told her that, she's like, oh, I knew that from the moment that I met you. So I think that some people can, sense certain things in certain ways as well.
So
Yeah.
ADHD radar.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can sense other ADHDers, but
But
it's interesting that a lot of people with ADHD approach you with this stuff.
yeah. And I think a lot of times too, a big reason we will avoid our money because we are so afraid of what we will see. We are so scared and we just keep putting it off. And we think, if we just kind of bury our head in the sands, hopefully something will come along. Magically things will change, which then in turn, it doesn't get better until we dive into it. But that's where I think I wish that more financial people would talk about what can people do to dive more into their money and to be more consistent with it when it doesn't feel good. Because it is very easy to show up and to manage your money when you're making good money and your expenses are less and everything feels good. When everything is set up well, it is easier to show up. We really need to talk about the times that we're living in now where mental health, there is definitely more strains that are affecting it now. And how can you still be tending to your finances when things you don't like what you're seeing? So for example, in the beginning of my business, for me, my business journey was kind of traumatic. Some people will build up a business and then make a nice transition. Like, yes, it's still tough, but at least they built it up. For me, I left my power engineering job. I went back to school for a year for holistic nutrition, actually, and had no income coming in, did not take out a student loan, was living off money that I had saved, and then started my business. This was in 2017 before anyone knew what a financial coach was. I'm kind of one of the OG ones, especially in Canada. And so there was so much education for me on the front end, which meant that the money that was going out was definitely more money than what was coming in. So for me, I needed to really work on that emotional side to stay on top of everything. And I'm so glad that I did, because the more that you're avoiding because it feels like you can't handle it, the more that things are they're not coming together magically for you. So that's where just allowing yourself to test out different things to see what helps you emotionally. The biggest thing is just thinking about when your nervous system is triggered, the last thing you're going to do is make good financial decisions or want to plan your money. You just want to run the other way. So just think about what can you do to get that nervous system calm. So for example, that's where I said I really like tapping and using tapping in a financial sense to work through those fears, those worries, those anxieties, everything that is coming up for you, and then saying how it is that you want to feel. Or for example, when I said, like, if something happens where I'm frustrated, like there was one time I made an investment in my business that I regret. And I was pretty pissed off about it, to be honest, for quite a long time. So I did a lot of that, throwing that ball and just getting those feelings out until finally I got to the point where I felt a lot more neutral. It did not happen overnight because it was a big investment and I wish that I wouldn't have made it. So I just kept working through those feelings. So then that did not make it so I wouldn't invest in certain things going forward. I wouldn't let that that financial trauma make it so I couldn't trust myself in making good decisions anymore. But I needed to work through that because there was a lot of resentment there towards myself. And so that's something, just really think about what can you do to make yourself feel better emotionally. Another thing for me when I was very early on in my journey was when I would start to feel, especially when the anxiety was so bad for me, because if the anxiety got really bad, then I would want that to go away. And personally, and I know that this is also very common for women, is then turning to eating. And that is a very strong connection. If you feel like you're struggling with your finances, whether it's true or it's a perceived financial struggle, it is very common that food is an outlet. And it was for me. So I was getting kind of that double whammy there of then being mad at myself because now my eating out bill felt like it was absolutely ridiculous, but I felt like I couldn't control it. So one of those first things for me personally was when I would feel that anxiety coming on, I would tell myself, you need to go for a walk for 10 minutes. You need to get out of the house and you need to be outside. It will help to bring you down. And so that was really important for me to when things were the absolute worst, that was something that was really helpful. Of course, opening up to someone and saying, this is how I feel. And I didn't really want to talk about it because I felt a lot of shame. I will also say journaling was very helpful on the front end because, like I said, a lot of people don't know what they're actually feeling. I didn't either. I didn't even know when I had that anxiety and the binge eating. I didn't even know it was even connected to money. I was so out of touch. Like I knew that I was stressed about it every day, but I didn't know that that was the reason that I was having these other issues in my life until a coach that I was working with in 2016, 2017, she was like, I want you to journal after you've went through an episode and write down what was the environment right before the anxiety kicked in. And it was plain as day when I journaled that every single time it was that I would think about money and then I would just go down this rabbit hole. So there's really going to be two things. First, it's going to be allowing yourself to take some space to develop the awareness of what you're feeling and then exploring things to process it. So I wouldn't have been able to have tapped right off the bat and even known what to put into words if it wasn't for that journaling. So really seeing how those two parts can work together, the awareness piece, and then whatever way it looks like to process for you.
Nice. I love it. So I mean, I can relate to a lot of that stuff. I went through addiction treatment, and we talked a lot about emotions, and you think you know what emotions are, and then you get like the emotion wheel, or the first thing in the morning, my counselor would say, "How are you feeling?" And you'd say, "Good." And she said, "No, French fries are good. How are you feeling?"
Yeah.
And so you really had to think, what am I feeling? What is this emotion? So yeah, that's just good life skills in general, let alone financial. So you really think about what you're feeling, and then process that feeling so that it doesn't keep creating that shame cycle. So then you process that. So then when you feel that again, you can actually like recognize what's happening, what you're feeling, how you can process it, and so that you don't get stuck
Yes.
there at that overwhelming emotional feeling. So that it's a bit like EMDR. It's almost like working through PTSD and
True.
trauma. Yeah. So you process stuff as opposed to just getting stuck and spinning your wheels in it. And
Yes.
then,
Yeah. I would say that it is similar because I've also done EMDR and I would compare the two in similar ways there. And one of the things I think I just want to talk about why people might be afraid to start to become a little bit more aware, to actually dive into their feelings, because it's
right.
so interesting. When I look back now, I was a very self-aware person in a lot of different ways and I was very mature. But when it came to identifying emotions, I had very little emotional intelligence in regards to that because growing up, I grew up in a household where we have a very severely genetic heart condition. So unless you were in the hospital, and it was my mother and my little brother that were basically growing up, one was always in the hospital. Pretty much my mom, she was gone for 6 months to Vancouver for a very extended heart surgery. And we didn't have any money, so I didn't even see her for 6 months. So to give just a little bit of context there. So unless you were in the hospital for a surgery or an infection or the house was on fire, you did not have anything to complain about. So that's where I just became very numb and didn't know at all really how I was feeling. I couldn't cry. I'd go to a funeral, I'd feel embarrassed because I'd be missing this person. I couldn't cry to save the life. And when you talk about that emotions wheel, I was so out of touch that I didn't even realize. I knew that I got frustrated very easily, and I knew that I got resentful because I had a hard time speaking up about how I felt. But I was so out of touch, I had no idea that those emotions stem from anger. I had no clue. And so that's something where I just want people to be really kind with yourselves, to know that you might think that you know how you're feeling, but a lot of times we don't because we didn't feel emotionally safe growing up to actually explore our feelings. And another thing in regards to that is really just, I was so scared to journal. That coach told me for a really long time to journal. And the reason that I wouldn't journal was because I was so afraid that if I started to dive into what it was, I actually thought my life was going to fall apart even worse. I thought, Jesus, like it feels like the anxiety is so bad and the panic attacks. And I thought that I was then going to stew on things more. And I didn't want that then I wasn't even diving into it. I was still just trying to push through it and just be positive. And that was the worst thing. So I just want to let people know that if you're feeling a resistance, ask yourself, like, what am I so afraid of? And I'm stronger than I think I am. And that you're not going to completely just fall apart when you do this. It might, to me, when I opened up to that coach for the first time and I was really honest with her about what I was feeling, it felt like there was a 30-pound anvil on my chest that had finally been lifted and I could breathe for the first time in my life. And to me, what was also helpful was really just, if you want to open up to someone, just figuring out, what do you think feels like the safest space? So for example, when I opened up to that coach, I did not know her personally. And that's what felt the safest to me, was opening up to someone who is non-biased. And I think that's a reason why people like to come to me as well and will be honest with me, is because I'm a third party who doesn't have that emotional connection, and people aren't worried that I'll have any, biases coming into the situation. So that's another thing too, is allowing yourself to know it's safe for you to dive in whatever way. And you can look up some journal prompts online if you're like, I literally don't even know what to do. That's the one thing I wished, is that I had some journal prompts to make it a little bit easier. And so that's something you can look them up online, or you can just start with, what is, my money story? Like, if I was to tell someone my money story, what would that look like? Because even just getting a little bit out of your head, when you read that over, it's going to start to give you a lot more awareness. Another thing is, if you're scared that someone might read it, then maybe you could do it digitally in some way that someone won't see this. Because I know that was another thing too, is I was afraid of, if I wrote something, if someone found it and took it out of context. So also, just, if there's any resistance, ask yourself, what is that resistance and what can I do to work through that? Or is there a different solution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is great. It's funny. I've talked to so many people about so many like insanely traumatic and emotional things. But just sitting here talking with you right now, I could feel tears welling up in my eyes for some reason. I was like, what is happening right now? But it's funny, like you said, like the stuff that feels ouchy to talk about, that's the stuff you need to talk about. It's like the stuff you don't want to talk about. There's a reason why your body doesn't want to talk about it. And it's not the end of the world. It actually, it might suck for, I've had enough therapies that is like, that sucked. So for the rest of the day, I take it easy after that therapy session. But ultimately, it is the best thing ever, whether it's about finances or not. But you talked about, you went to eating emotionally, and I've gone through addiction therapy. So I often wonder if maybe that's one of my triggers too. It's like, when I think of finances, I think, well, I was such a dirtbag when I was drinking and stuff, because all my money went to that, and I wasn't spending it on my family and stuff. I wasn't supportive financially for my family, but yet always had money for weed and booze. Anyway, I'm just kind of all over the place right now because there's just, you talk pretty fast and there's a lot of information and I'm trying to process it all. And
Totally.
but I like that. I'm not, no judgment. I like that you talk fast because it's a lot of information. So I like it. But it's that time again for that Somebody Special segment where we chat about who cooperated in your mental health journey and helped fill your emotional tank, brought to you by Co-op. And being a small town Saskatchewan girl, I'm sure you have probably 3 different Co-op cards or
Yep.
numbers. And Co-op's been so wonderful with sponsoring the podcast and stuff. So they've been a very big light in my financial dark time right now. But anyway, is there anybody before, that you want to give a shout out to that's been there for you in some of your darkest moments?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I definitely have to say my husband. He has been my rock. He is the person that is really the stability there when I'm going through a rough time. So shout out to my husband Reese for sure, and my sister Carly, who's been there for me when I just needed to talk as well. And then the person I would say was really on the front end of this, the person I mentioned about the coach that I had worked with at that time about the anxiety and the binge eating. Her name was Jillian Trigg, and she was that person who I reached out to, that I said I had a conversation with, and I just opened up really honestly. And really for me, that was that turning point, was really just being able to feel like I had a safe space to open up. And that's where things just started to finally change to the positive, was really me opening up to her and her helping me through that, and to have that courage of having those then hard conversations after that. And another thing too was, I was so afraid to talk to people about certain things because I didn't want to then emotionally make it difficult for them. And that was something I really had to learn on my journey, was being responsible for my own emotions, but not taking it on for everyone else. Because then what that led to was a lot of conversations that weren't had and resentment that would build up. And I do find that that is actually a pretty common thing that starts to happen in any type of a relationship, whether it's your relationship with your partner. I see it a lot of times actually in financial coaching with relationships with parents or other people as well. And so that's something I think is really important too, is also remembering that other people are in charge of, how they feel about something. You can't make someone feel some way. You can be careful about how you deliver certain things, but it is still on someone else. So just reminding you to keep that in mind, so then you don't just keep everything in, because I was the queen of bottling it up, and that was the worst possible thing that led to a lot of really crappy mental health times for me.
So yeah, that's something I definitely do. It's like, my wife hates me because I'm not bringing in money. She's been so supportive. Like, she doesn't hate me, or my kids resent me and they think I'm a lazy or I'm whatever because I'm constantly quitting jobs, and now I'm, all they do is see me talk to people on my computer and, and stuff. So when you get in that cycle, is there a way out of that? Would tapping work for that too, and talking out loud?
I do find it does, because then the more that you start to do it, the more that you realize certain pieces, like, this isn't actually true. My wife doesn't resent me. We do actually have a healthy relationship, but I think it's really important to get the feelings out. And then the more that you start to tap on them, the less that you start to identify and sit with those feelings and are holding on to them so tightly. And the more that you are able then to have more bandwidth to do more things, to actually move your finances. Because that's such a big thing too, is not enough people talk about the connection of, when we're feeling all of these emotions, our bandwidth is so much lower to actually take positive action in either managing our money or doing things that can increase it. And so I think that's really important to talk about, how much the emotions can shift the bandwidth, which then the actions, we can take more actions and not procrastinate as much.
It's not fair. Just let me feel crappy for a bit. But once I feel crappy for a bit, then I get stuck in the crappiness, and I don't have, like you said, the bandwidth to do something about it. But I know you have to go right away too. So I just want to make sure that if there's anything else you wanted to say before you did leave, that the floor is yours.
I have a few podcast episodes that are really focused on specific topics around your family money paradigm, how things were growing up. And I would just love for people to check those out if that feels good to them. Also, like the worthiness side. So my podcast is called Intentionally Wealthy, and it's kind of in like the 20s section. I feel like probably about like maybe 19 to 26 or something in my podcast series, that really is really going deeper to help you to just understand more about that emotional side, make some more connections. So I would love if the person listening here today would just allow themselves to just take in some more information, to just build that awareness, and maybe start making some more connections as to what are some of those factors at play that are causing you to feel the way that you do with your money.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put all your stuff in the show notes. So if people want to reach out to you or listen to your podcast or whatever, it'll be there.
And if you ever have anyone that reaches out about anything, or if you want to dive deeper into some of the kind of more specific things about money traumas and different things, we can definitely record another one in the future if you want, or if there's other aspects that anyone has brought up about anything specifically that you'd like to kind of dive deeper in, because there's so much that we can cover here. It is so hard in this time frame. So I felt like I wanted to give things that people could really take from this to apply to their life. But I think some of the other stuff can be helpful too. So if you ever want to, then reach back out.
Be sure to subscribe and to like this video. You can listen on Apple Podcast and Spotify. This is Todd Rennebaum saying, make your beds and take your meds. Keep watching for more interviews with incredible people telling their stories of resilience and adversity with mental health and mental illness.